search for in all my work if I really find a silk paper. Of course, I found quite many papers which with addition of silk, sometimes quite many fibers. So in this case, it could be called silk paper by addition of some fibers, but never really silk paper which is made uniformly from silk fibers. Simply they do not tangle, fibrillate enough, so it's not really technologically, it's almost impossible, right? So that's, but I wanted to tell you about surprise. It's, you know, we are learning all life, right? That's, in a way, that looks like it's silk, right? Yeah. And it's like silk paper.
Where does the color come from?
Color is kind of because it was not bleached and it's yeah, from the. But it's not made by human.
Wow.
You know what is it? I have it from Thailand. I interviewed paper maker, woman who had her factory, and she showed me this production. She kind of claimed that she invented it for her kind of cosmetic business, and how it is made. She put the frames, and she took the silkworms, and she left it in this bordered frame, and they were walking, leaving the structure. Yeah, I could not believe. So and then I thought about all my research and this quest and searching for silk paper in the Dunhuang manuscripts, and I reminded how many times I told people that no, it can't, silk paper can't exist, right, or some technologically. Yeah, so you see, so but it's not. I'm not even sure if we can call it paper. But the structure is exactly like it's incredible, right? It's like paper. But it's not done by human, and definitely.
And what does she? Can I just ask? What does she use it for?
She
not for writing. Or
no. It's for cosmetic business. So she makes like a nice pads, you know, for creams, and she's very popular with this.
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
Because it's very gentle. So and that's it's really something very interesting. Yeah. So you see, silk paper.
And where did you find this beach bark?
It's from Dolpo. Yeah, so people in those regions, people still, sometimes they take a note, or they have a lot of those trees. Yeah, so it's kind of easy for them. But also what I was surprised in Dolpo, I found it. I thought that you see 3 small documents did not surprise me, but I've also seen a couple of praying mills, which were like 1.5 meters.
Just sorry.
Yeah.
I have a super dumb question.
Yeah.
Where is Dolpo?
Dolpo is western Nepal. It's
Nepal.
exactly like you have Pokhara. Do you know Kathmandu is like a more in the middle, let's say. Then to the west you have Pokhara at the like a small hilly area, and then up you have Mustang, and that was the trade road, and then to the west you have Dolpo, yeah.
Okay.
So it's really high
and they
mountains.
have a good concentration of birch bark.
Yes, they have it. Those are high mountains, but the mountains landscape is totally different than in Mustang. Mustang is a lot of like sandy cliffs, caves, and Dolpo, I would not say it's like Alps, but a little bit more that direction, right? And very high passes and deep valleys also. Yeah, so that's why walking to Beecher, for example, that's from the area more or less. So That was 9 days exactly from the, and not the from Pokhara, it's from Jupal, from the airport, yeah, the farthest point where you can flew in by those small planes, and then it was 9 days walking, and before I went there, my colleague who wanted to collaborate with me said, "Oh no, it's just three high passes over 4,000 something, or no, over 5,000." He said, "Yeah." So that was he was not lying, but. Then I realized when we were walking, I counted 9 passes, but yeah, maybe 3 were over 5,000, but you know, remaining 6 were just below, like 4,900. So that's the area how it was.
And have you seen, sorry, getting back to the bag, I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
I'm really curious. Have you seen the process of, because I have seen how they strip it from the tree, but you still have a very thick.
Yeah.
How do they manage to get it to have it so thin without like any imperfection, without tearing it or anything?
Unfortunately, I can't really answer this because I haven't seen how they strip it. You know, sometimes I think you can take it because I've seen it on the tree. You can take it in the large, but I have no idea, and that's why I mentioned this meter and half almost praying wheels, right? Which is a lot of this bark. They are all like this, and that size. I have no idea. Yeah, of course, it was not possible. I was not able to unroll it to see, so I don't know how maybe they glued it together. They must, of course, because there's no tree. But how it was done, I'm not sure. Yeah. So it's also puzzles me the same as you.
When I've read in literature a few descriptive process of how they, in some manuscripts, how they treat the bark, but it's very. You really show like, okay, they're sanding it a bit, but to get to such thinness, it's difficult to imagine without seeing it, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So.
And these lines, and how do they?
No, that's the natural
it's
from
natural.
the. It's natural,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
So
but
that's.
It fits perfectly for a Tibetan script. So I thought it was artificial.
Yeah, you see, that's like the. Exactly, like a uchen, right? And the upper.
Along the natural lines that were already on the manuscript.
Oh, you see, so you remember the landscape, right?
Approximately straight. Right?
So the lines would kind of help them know how to size letters. I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because it's the horizontal line, so that's the.
And can you identify this one? Not this one. Yeah, I'm actually. It's very similar with one Bengali.
You have to look at it.
I think this is like end of sentence, so it could be.
All that work. Exhausted.
It's a labor intensive, right? So the.
Get your passes.
They're going to unionize.
Exactly, the map, right? Something like a landscape. Yeah, so just please feel free to look at this. Maybe before I go to other types of paper, I will show you a couple of more steps here for those not familiar with the paper making process. So.
One last thing about this. Is this dyed? Is this coloured? Natural colour, is it, do you think?
I think it's. I'm not sure from where. I don't think she dyed it. No, it's rather. But the color maybe from the also some kind of those pads she uses for them working. So yes, not sure. Yeah. Okay, and that's getting to the next fiber processing. So.
Just 10 seconds. I think when people are making silk, it looks like the original color of the first procedure.
Okay.
It looks like naturally. Okay. But I'm not sure.
So it may be even natural, right? So maybe because I did not remember her dying or anything. So it's just I think it's just this. So
and it's so beautiful. You don't need to dye.
Part of it might be depending on what the worms are eating, as well. To be honest,
but
they eat mulberry leaves. Yeah.
Are
So-
mulberry leaves yellow? Do they have like any yellow compounds inside?
Not really.
Okay.
No,
But
that's
when
the-
they're making
yeah.
silk, they
Yeah.
it is the original color, and then they have to dye it if they want to make a shoe with silk.
So almost all the silk that we see is dyed then.
Yeah. So it's the most natural color, closest to the most natural color.
You to adjust
I can
it to your own eye. So I can lift it up or down.
Very interesting.
Okay, I will get to the process, those who are not familiar. So next, like we have the fiber processing, right? And of course, it can be done manually or in a mechanical way, right? So manual, mostly in Asia, like we have like beating, first of all, but also it's done sometimes in a different way, sometimes traditionally with wooden mallets, sometimes with stones, so it's on the stone surface or on the wood, on something hard. Especially in China, there's this additional step sometimes of cutting, So, of course, it makes a change because you have longer fibers or shorter, right? It's easier, cutting is easier for production. It makes the paper then a little bit softer. If you need this difference in between manuscripts and prints is often that for prints, exactly, you need the paper a little bit more softer and absorbent because especially in Asia, it was not like a Gutenberg press. It's like a xylography, right? And the printing is just by touching quickly to the wooden xylograph plank or block, right? And then you just do quickly like a touch by one move and take it out. Yes, so it's a very short time when you print. So you need to have paper which is soft and absorbent enough. It gets the ink in such a short time, because it's not a long pressure at the same time for all sheets. So that's for this purpose. Some fibers are better. Like for example, in Tibetan case, the stellera, those fibers are much softer. So always, often that was added to Daphne paper, especially if it was intended for printing. Cotton is a soft fiber, right? Or some other as well. But then we get to mechanical beaters. In Europe we have Hollanders, which are basically after all the, I will not go through history now, but the idea is like it has a knife, of course. So it was like a process of beating together with process of cutting in a way, because it was in those machine works explaining in a very simple way, like there's a pressure of water through very narrow space, and there is the wheel which has those ether knives or like a blank metal, how to call it in English, but that's kind of water is pressed, right, and then makes those pulp and those fibers in water exactly both beaten and cut at the same time. That's the for the cooking. So it should be a slide earlier before this. That's different substances which were used to make to help to defiber. So it's like a step before cutting and processing fibers. Yeah. So traditionally it was done with the ash from the fireplaces. But then it was found out that using some chemical substances, so that speed the process. So that now, for example, on most of areas and workshops, nobody really works with ash. Or basically it was like a potash, it was water filtered through the ash from the fireplace. So that makes water softer and helps to cook and disintegrate fibers. Then we can have all kind of different additives. So sometimes like exactly mucilages. It's just aloe as example, but there are many of those mucilages depending on areas. And I think that maybe exactly in China, when they started to use more paper mulberry than rag paper, that paper mulberry paper is really thin, very good quality, and like a step you see that it's another technological achievement, right? So that was, I think, true mucilages that at that time, more or less, probably they were more in use and discovered that what they help to evenly spread the long fibers in the water slurry, and that helps to make really good quality, even in thickness paper. And you see in Dunhuang documents a really difference in between those rag paper, which is always thicker. And when I usually measure for Dunhuang documents, I usually measure at least in 5 places for the thickness of paper. And then in rag paper, it's very often that the difference is really large, right? So obviously paper is not even. But for paper mulberry paper, it's really even, yeah? The thickness at 5 points or more, it's the same.
When you're talking about paper mulberry, you're talking about the fiber, right?
Fiber, yeah, of course.
And what is the paper rag then you're talking about?
Rags is just recycled.
Ah, okay,
Yes.
okay.
Recycled
Sorry, my English is
clothes.
Thank you.
So that was like in Europe, just different type of clothes. This is why in Dunhuang documents usually we have hemp, but we have a lot of rami. We have sometimes some additions of jute fibers, right? Some from ropes, from some recycled. So which basically a little bit of cotton, as I mentioned, right? But never. So it's from clothes from. But interesting also things. In rag paper I also found sometimes. Definitely singular or a couple of fibers, little portions of fibers of paper mulberry. And for a long time also I was thinking why it was not used for rugs. So what sense it is to add paper mulberry fibers? And then I was searching and talking to people, and I realized that monks wear the paper clothes.
Yes,
Yeah.
paper clothes.
Exactly. So that's probably.
It's unintentional.
No, it was intentionally, because it was intentional recycling, right?
Okay.
So they were collecting old used clothes or some fishing, I don't know, nets or ropes or some textiles, basically.
Is that the same idea they use for the Tanka paper? You know, the Tanka
Which-
painting in Nepal?
No, why?
In Nepal, I found that they have another art form, like it's like.
Yeah, Tanka. Yeah, I know Tanka painting very well,
Is
but
it paper or like?
no, this is textile. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
this is Tanka painting is usually like a cotton textile, which is primed with some clay primer, right? Then painting layers, and the borders are made of silk.
Oh, it's totally different.
It's totally different piece of work, yeah, and that they are scroll. Tanka means scroll, so that's and it's mostly painted, yeah. So sometimes they have a little of papers in the back, like for some how you call it when you in English word for a ceremony when you open eyes of the Tanka and you start what's the
Consecration.
Yeah, consecration. Yeah, exactly. So that's for consecration. Sometimes but it's also rare. So it's basically Tanka is textile. Yeah. So.
Can I ask Agnieszka, when you're talking about the rags, you know the way in Europe they allowed mold, or they allowed it to ferment?
Yeah.
Do they do this?
Yes, they did this as well. Yeah. I think it was very much the same.
Anything to soften.
Anything to soften,
Anything to
exactly.
soften.
And that was then, so the process of rag paper was kind of much shorter. Because also those textile, and if they mixed with some even paper or something, so it wasn't that. I think European rugs were needed a bit more, were much harder. than Chinese rugs, I would say. Yeah. Also rami is very very long, but the fibers are really very fibrillated in those papers. So
Have they been beaten though?
yeah, they've been beaten for sure. Yeah. So
Yeah, I must tell you later my experience. I was in Japan for a while. And the restoration process, binding, goes on for days. And
Yeah.
I was really full. That's exhausting.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's I think the case. Yeah.
Sorry, because I work it. So you said that the paper mulberry took over the rag paper. When did it happen, this transition?
6th, 7th century of first millennium. Yeah.
Okay. But maybe they still use rag paper for wrapping or stuff because you said it was thicker or...
No, they were using this rag paper. You still have documents, I think, till the 11th, 12th century, maybe. So you can find later also. It was not like,
of course it didn't
sharp cut off. So it was, of course, slowly. But then I think from the second millennium it was
and they preferred
very
paper
rare.
mulberry because it was more supple and more even than rag paper.
Yeah, exactly. So and also for Chinese style of writing and calligraphy, it's much when you look at with the brush, right?
Yeah.
So of course the paper mulberry gave this character which was much better material. So it was not a. And also for scrolls, for book formats, also like from the very beginning book formats. We have to, I think, always look in not just at one thing, So everything kind of have impact on the other. If you have one invention, if you change the writing tool, everything in a way change, And paper, properties of paper develops immediately. And the same with the book form, So the Chinese books were like scrolls, and then those exactly stab-stitched binding or butterfly binding or all those types. It's like it's also like a bifolio, but you don't have like quires. You have bifolios which are sewn or rather stab-stitched and joined together on the other side. So this what in European books is on the edge, it's opposite, right? Yeah. So it's very thin paper and it's written on one side. So it's also connected to the type of paper used, and exactly, paper mulberry. So why paper mulberry is so popular in conservation? Because exactly, it's very strong. It has these properties, And in Japan, they mastered the technology. But Japanese paper is so well known in the West for the conservation purposes. But also Korean paper is almost the same, Chinese paper also has a paper mulberry, and in a way also for this purposes can have the same properties. But we know Japanese paper first of all, but it's connected to trade contacts with Europe, and that's a different story in a way.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so mucilages, so things which we can have in the paper, right? So mucilages is exactly this element in China. Sometimes it's kiwi, sometimes it's opuntia cacti from. It's this sticky plant, gel, something like this, exactly, or middle part of aloe. Sometimes it's the root of hibiscus manihor, and that's exactly what it makes. The fibers starts to they do not entangle anymore. So that's why it allows to make it really thin and get good properties. It's also important in the paper making process when you take it's connected to this technology with the movable sieve, and that when you use this form, then you take the sheet of paper out of the sieve, and you can put one on the other without any felts or any other materials in between, and it does not stuck. If you do the same with European paper, and you press, you will never take it again, right? Because it's gelatin and different methods of sizing. So there are those differences in those properties. So some dyes, of course, but sometimes papers were dyed directly in the pulp, but sometimes they were dyed later with brush and all kind of techniques here.
The drying process?
Yeah, after that, so there are different possibilities and sizes also depending on the region. So those mucilages is also kind of sizing. Yeah, but another sizing could be starch also. Yeah, in Tibetan books it's also animal glue sometimes, right? And some other interesting substances for some specific techniques, for example. Okay, just when I will jump now for a moment to the beginning, because that's also connected to material analysis. Usually, we think about paper as made of plant materials, but in fact it can have really a lot of different components, and some are intentional, important for the process, some are just environmental substances later, sometimes it's from the water. So when we do material analysis, it's also important to understand that specific substances could get into paper structure at different stages at different times. Yes, so it's not always. And also, I tried to like timeline for paper components. So there are basic raw materials, so it can be fibers from plants, animals, recycled wood pulp, industrial cellulose, whatever, depending on area. But then recycled, but then. During the process, it's like caustic soda, mucilages, starch, fillers, earth substances, sometimes dyes, if that's intention to dye paper at this stage, and some chemicals as well. Then post-production, which are like primers and coatings in case, especially in case of manuscripts. So they prepared, like for example in Tibetan books, they sometimes used starch or animal glue also to size the paper and to polish it, right? So that's also this post-production stage. So sometimes if there is a dye, paper is dyed after, so it's also the moment when they introduce new substances. But then we have a degradation and all kind of substances which are coming from the degradation process, and environment, like even dirt or some for archaeological objects, right? So paper is such a margin in archaeological excavations because in many cases it's not preserved, but especially in the like Central Asia and when climate, or Tibet sometimes in caves, it is preserved. But still, archaeologists do not like really to deal with it, so it's always left somehow, and rarely really. But those papers have quite a lot of sand and some kind of ground substances. Okay, so now we get back to the process. So we talk about additives, mucilages, and that's important moment. But then we will jump to the examples again, to samples. So we have those different sheet formation techniques, and it's connected. We have like two main is like dipping technology and floating technology. So dipping technology is that you dip your paper making mold in the water to take the sheet of paper, to make a sheet of paper. And floating technology is when you have this frame, usually with a cotton textile or some other material used for a sieve, which is sieve, and it floats on the water surface, right? And then the main difference is if it's dipping, so there are different techniques and or skills, depending on skills of paper making, of shaving this paper. So sometimes it's like the dipping method is usually what we have in Europe or in some places in Southeast Asia, for example. So it's just like a one dip and mold is taken out, yeah, and water is drained with a little bit of shaking only, but it's just by one. But there's a scooping method, which is like exactly Japan, China, right, and Korea. So it's taken a couple of times, like you see here, right? So he's taking and moving the mold many times. It takes a little bit of water slurry, a little bit of pulp, and shaking, right? So this structure of those papers are really layered, yeah?
Yeah.
So, and then if we use like 3D microscopes, and so sometimes we see different fiber directions, right? So it's also not easy to interpret those data, because when you do the record, when you obtain the data at the nanoscale, so it's direction of fibrils, not the fibers, right? But then it's exactly, it's coming from technology. So the direction of fibers is different, and we can detect it with tools now. So if it was like, but also important to remember that it's a hand work, yeah? So some paper makers will shake more that direction, some will shake a bit like this, yeah. So it's important. There is a general tendency, but it's not identical. Like, so it's not that easy interpretations that, oh, we will have a certain value and we always say, yeah, that's this technology. Nothing like this.
Different results like that, moving, shaking, like. So if they move this direction, after that, is there any difference of that outcome? And
it's the physics of, you know, like liquids and the water. We also observed it with the recent experiment. It was quite interesting, yeah, because it's like the gravitation, yeah. So the water. So the first moment the sieve like catch the fibers, but then they are like, you know, positions in a different direction. And if there's like a strong movement that way, so the paper starts to have like kind of direction, we call it, right? What does it mean physically with papers? When you fold the paper, so sometimes it's very easy to fold it. Sometimes you feel like it's not that easy, right? So then, exactly, for example, like machine-made paper, they always have a strong directions, yeah? Why? Because there's the pulp is poured on the stream of like a belt of paper, exactly, which is moving. So the fibers, when they just drop down, and they are taken like this. So the paper has direction, right?
It's very important in conservation.
It's very important to conservation because it's instability in size, yeah, and the size is changed in one direction more than other. So if you use the materials to restore or to support the object, and you don't pay attention to direction, and you have it, then there's more tension, and it's likely that your conservation may not be that good for a long time, right? If so, this is why it's very important for this reason. But yeah, you see, and then we get to pouring method. So with the floating mold, it's also. Sometimes it's like in Himalayas, very often I've seen in Nepal that they just pour the fibers and they mix it, right? So if you have larger format of books and you are lucky, you can still observe it, and that's clear what technology was used. But sometimes they are doing, you see, like this, very kind of, so it's also depending on skills. It wasn't like one way of pouring the fibers every time. But those papers usually do not really have strong directions in any way, because also very often paper makers spend, especially with large format, quite long time. They are working like really, I've seen it also in Thailand with a larger format. I think for half an hour they were kind of gently moving the water, splashing on the waiting till it's really very evenly spread before they decide to take all the sieve and mold out. So it also makes a difference in the properties of those papers. So yeah, and then the drying, and why those technologies are so important, because those paper making molds are equipped with different sieves. Yeah, so there's movable sieves which were usually made from the grass or bamboo sticks, and that will give us this structure of late structure. Yeah, and so I will show you in a moment. But maybe we just use time and finish the process, and then this is like a drying. It's also sometimes, as you see here, sometimes in China or some areas it can be dried on the walls, but again, depending on what the walls were made, if there's clay, so you will have the texture on the paper, right? And or if it's with this floating simple technology, which is most often in Himalayas and in Southeast Asia, the paper had to be dried on the molds, because it's impossible to take it out. So mucilages were not used in this case, and somehow you will destroy the paper if you try to take it off wet. So they had to wait till paper is absolutely dry, then they can take it. So production takes a long time. But also the print of textiles is sealed in the paper structure. So you have it either, like from cotton, there's not that much pattern, but sometimes it's like something else, like a rough hemp or something. So you clearly see the textile pattern printed in the paper in such cases. Or like recently, in most cases in Southeast Asia, for example, plastic sieves are used. It's not even nylon, it's plastic. And that gives also kind of typical print. And at least in this case, it's good because it helps to date. Yeah, so before plastic traditionally we know.
Would the fibre, the finish be slightly more shiny?
Pardon?
Would the surface finish be a little smoother or shinier, do you think?
With plastic?
Yeah. Do you notice a difference?
I think this shining is more what they do another step, calendering.
Yes, but
Yeah.
not just using the plastic.
I don't think
No,
so.
you're not seeing a difference.
No, you don't see a different, because it really depends how it dries. Yeah. So I think this shining comes if sometimes they use. I've seen basic like two ways of doing calendering. One is they have like a little roll, and when they take the wet sheet of paper on the mold, still they just place it against the wall or something, and they do like with this little roll. Very slowly, they just drain the water, and that usually, press the fibers, and it's not, of course, because it's wet, so it's not polishing, but it's kind of, they even this, right?
No, I just thought with the plastic being so unabsorbent, and so densely finished, that it might. I just wondered, did it leave a different surface?
I haven't seen it. I understand. Yeah, that could be possible.
Yeah.
But even if it does something like this, it's not for the people's eye. Texture you can see clearly. Yeah. So from. Yeah, exactly. Which helps. I don't have exact date. Yeah. It's recent. It's 20th century. Yeah. So that's basically it's a good information for provenance right away. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or sometimes it's dried like after the from the dipping and technology. There is another step. They press the pile of papers, right? So then they just half dry a little bit, or when they drained water off, they just put it on the ground, on the grass. Like this, right? So, and in this case, it's especially in China. Sometimes you see like half of the heel with the sheets of paper placed there. So it's a nice view. And a more modern way of drying. So they're like hot plates. it's all the Korea, Japan, China now, so it makes it helps to speed the drying process, of course. And Europe, it has also many. Of course, they hang sometimes the paper on the strings, yeah, but they are also like a hot plate, like a cylinder hot plate. So there are many technological options here. Before we get to the structure, I would like to keep going with a presentation of samples. Yeah, exactly. So what do you think from the process, how, for example, those two papers are made? Which technology? Do you have?
These two?
Yeah. Or difference in sieves or whatever?
Is this the texture of the thing that it dry on?
No, this is laid lines. So this is but that's a very important point because sometimes exactly when you look against light and you see so clearly those are quite laid lines exactly. So those laid lines are in fact prints of those bamboo sticks which were used to make the sieve, and the sieve is like sushi mat. So which is like sticks of bamboo, sometimes very thin, sometimes thicker, just sewn together with the thread. Different types, sometimes hemp, but traditionally also often those who wear like a horse hairs. Yeah, and then in Asian papers we have like those laid lines are from the bamboo sticks, so they are quite hard and so visible. Earlier papers in Dunhuang, for example, you could see. Oh, I think I have a photo, so I will just show you right away. Yes. Yeah, here maybe. This paper, for example, right? Here is like the example I mentioned in Nepal, like pouring method, and exactly you see, they just mix the paper, and you see it in paper, right? Then this one, you also see some kind of lines, right? Yes. You see it, right? So, but they are not very regular. Yeah. So what does it mean? What do you think? What the sieve was made of?
Something related to like if it's a material, grass or like.
Yeah, exactly. Something softer, right? Yeah. Exactly like this. So that's what you see then, because with the water and pressure, grass was not hard enough.
Yes.
So those sieves which were made of grass, those lines are, sometimes beautiful, but it's not like a straight laid lines. And also comparing, for example, to European paper, right? It's in European paper, laid lines are really very straight. You know why? Because the sieves were made of metal. Okay. So that's hard material, even harder than bamboo, right? So that's and does not is not damaged so quickly, right? So then this is why the structure is really fine, accurate. In this sense, but grass with water and it changes, so it moves, right? So you have all those irregularities, or even like this, right? Some it's the Tibetan. Some are really straight, you see, but there are areas when you see it very. Unclear, lines, right? No lines. And also another interesting thing from some Dunhuang documents. I remember I think it was Tibetan Chronicle which I work on with Brandon, right? It was this panel 11, very mysterious. They were like laid lines, and but chain lines were disappearing. So it was like first kind of we thought that maybe it's a different paper because one panel has chain lines. Chain lines is exactly from the sewing, right? It's not the bamboo sticks, it's those sewing marks, and other does not have it. So that may be different. But then we realized I found at some point the piece of paper which had half of the page had this chain line, and that it did not have anymore. And I realized that yes, when the sieve is used, sometimes, especially if it was sewn with horsehairs, they somehow can disappear, right? And that makes that partly you still see it in paper structure, and then it's no more there, right? So it's not a mystery or anything like this. It has an explanation. So that's why. And this is example, or like a Chinese imperial production. You see very even, very fine lines, usually like around 30 and 3 centimeters. So can you see it?
Yeah.
Just yeah. So and the thickness of this paper is also very accurate. When measured in 5 places, it's almost the same value. So that's usually those papers were exactly made of paper mulberry. Those were not rack papers. Yeah, and some other examples for documents. Those are some excerpts from Hunan statues and some rituals papers. And you see those chain lines can be sometimes very close to each other, sometimes, and that's also mark, right? That's also feature which we document, because on these cases we can search even for mold mates, paper mold mates, the paper which are done according to the same technology. Of course, it's not the same. We cannot still say that it was for sure the same workshops, because workshops could share the similar sieves and types, but sometimes generally in the region, yes, it's helpful. Yeah, so that's our times. Yeah, and different times they were used. And this is like example, machine made. Yes, it's from the felt. So you see the structure is totally different in this case. Yeah, and European papers with watermarks. Unfortunately, in Asia we don't have it, so we cannot really identify on that basis. Okay, let's get to this. So exactly, this is like from this woven paper type, we call it. So it's this floating technology, which is like a simple wooden frame, usually with the textile spread on it. So that's the paper, and basically on those types of paper, you don't see any pattern, clear pattern, right? So I will show you maybe a couple of more examples from a little bit thicker, right? You can also maybe look just on the other and.
What you call, sorry, just to make sure I understood properly. So when you say float, you mean that with mobile rack to.
No, floating mold, I mean that it floats on the surface of the water, and usually those types of molds.
The pulp just get on it?
The pulp is just poured on it.
Ah, okay, so
poured and
float
mixed.
Doesn't exit on the surface, it's a mix.
Yeah, yeah. It's mixed by hand.
Yeah.
It's also interesting technologically, depending on how tall the frame is. It can dips a little bit more or a little bit less, right? And to make things even more difficult, for example, Nashi area. That's the area where technology was hybrid. So it does not help because instead of frame, they use like a wooden box almost. So it dips deeper, right? More. And they often used for the box bamboo sieve, unfortunately. So that's difficult really to know in between,
They're not setting it into pulp.
They're pouring the pulp. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's, but then direction and how the fibers spread, you need to pay attention to this, but you still have the laid structure in those paper, yeah?
And I have
So-
another question. It's about the paper mulberry in Kozo. So Kozo is from paper mulberry.
Yeah.
Is it like a specific location of the paper mulberry? Because I see both terms in some talks. I see both terms. Like some people say Kozo, some people say paper mulberry. Is it that because does Kozo add an additional information?
No, I will tell you from where Kozo is. Kozo is because Japanese were so wonderfully active in promoting papermaking culture, what was great, and the first contacts and how for conservation and for artists here in Europe and France and States, and they were buying paper, and simply Japanese terminology got first. To the,
but it's really the same.
it's really the
just
same.
Kozo
It's
is much more
paper.
Japanese code, yes.
Why? Brosonetia kajinoki is the paper mulberry which grows in Japan, and Japanese term is kozo used for this. So trade term. So that's why in Europe and many papermaking not papermaking, also conservation workshops, people use kozo because this is how we learned, right? I also learned this to use
They also
kozo.
take it from different parts of the bark. It's different depths, so you get different types of.
Different qualities.
Hosokawa, I think, is the very heavy one, which is the basis of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Karibari balls. That's
Yeah,
kozo.
yeah,
It's
that's
a completely
kozo, but
different kozo.
kozo is a plant,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Brosonetia kajinoki. So there are two: Brosonetia kajinoki and Brosonetia papyrifera. There are two Brosonetias, paper mulberries, common name, which are usually used for paper. That is important, but those are really details, right? It's exactly it's how the quality, how trees grow. That's I don't think
In
it's.
fact, the kozo is coming from Canada because they have bloomed. They don't have enough kozo in Japan. I don't know whether they've changed that.
I think to some they cultivate, but yeah, that's true. It's changing. Yeah, exactly. So, but from the scientific point of view, I'm not able to detect the difference. It's even difficult to not possible almost to see differences in between like paper mulberry and mulberries. Right? Mulberries are those used for silk production. Yeah, for feeding the worms, and that's Morus alba and Morus loa mostly, which was used. But for the, and also, now it's more complicated if you look at the a cultivation of those plants and also spread. Like for example in Thailand, and they start also getting to a lot of or send they paper mulberry strips of bast to the to Japan, for example, to use. So it's more complex now, I would say.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, so yeah, you see what? Okay, yeah, that's another. I was mentioning Chinese, the structure of the. Yeah. So you can observe very fine lines, and you can observe this. So it's definitely here you see very even, almost it's usually around 30, 33, even in 3 centimeters. Here is more or less like 10, 11. And that means that those bamboo sticks here are much thicker, right? So that's why we see it differently. Here's just to compare. Here's, for example, like a European paper. You can always look at as a reference.
Some paper is made out of deep,
Pardon?
the technology is deep.
Deep, exactly. And sometimes very large formats, because if there's a larger format, it's hanged from somewhere to help. To operate it evenly for paper making, because it's heavy. It's really hard job to be a paper maker and for this sheet formation process. Yeah, look also at this. This is also like Chinese. And so for a protocol for describing manuscripts for a paper, for example. So simple, you see, we can do a lot of scientific analysis using sophisticated equipment, but if we don't have equipment, we still can do quite a lot. So with understanding of technology, we can document exactly those features, like if it's laid or woven paper, simple way you can measure how many laid lines, just count, is within 3 centimeters. This is usually what's helpful, and then it allows for grouping and some kind of classification. So it's in this sense it's helpful. For example, that like if you have like a 10-11 laid lines like this, usually this structure is found in some Dunhuang papers, those rag papers, so very early. Then I don't know how exactly historically this technology was transferred, but Bhutan. This is also exactly paper, the most typical paper in Bhutan. They are used from the almost beginning those bamboo sieves, movable sieves. And all the remaining parts of the Himalayas, so it's floating mold with textile sieves. So immediately when you see this in the book, so there's a hint that paper may be from that area. So of course I would not absolutely classify something only exclusively on those features, because exactly in some this structure is not typical for very narrow and just one place, so it can be a couple of them. But then by step you can just pull information, and just sometimes if you are lucky you really get the provenance, right? So that's important. And yeah, you can just have a look for more. In China there are really many types of paper. So it's this most known, this Xuan paper for the calligraphy and for art. This is the most known. It's made from blue sandalwood fibers, bast, and that's like Pterocelsis tatarinovi, which is Latin name. And the quality they measure according to amount of Pterocelsis fibers. So if it's like 90% almost or 100%, it's rare because it's more expensive. So it means it's really Pterocelsis. It's this blue sandalwood. If it's 90%, that means it's really like a very good high quality, right? And also I wanted to pull your attention to, in China it's very difficult sometimes to classify or to communicate about the research on paper, because traditionally the terminology and how the names for paper in China is according to region name. And sometimes you see we get exactly the same characteristic with totally different names, because the regions different means produced in different regions, but has a very, very similar physical characteristics. And going from the analysis of manuscripts in the libraries, we find and we classify according to materials. And okay, if we find exactly that, let's say this is like blue sandalwood, yeah, exactly. So we want to say, okay, so that's this Xuan paper, right? But when I talk to my Chinese colleagues, we were always a bit confused, because it's somehow like it's so rooted in the tradition to name it by the geographical region. It's like whether it's Kaihua or some, it's always a bit confusing. But of course, I would recommend it to call it from the material properties and types of technology, because at least this is what we can really know. Yeah, this is what we can really read in paper. And geographical region, if the characteristic is almost identical, we have no chance to know, unless it's written or unless it's the ownership mark. What is also possible, there are some kind of, I think there's one person in States who was working on the seals, which were really like a paper maker's owners, but it's rare. It's like another almost discipline itself. with reading those seals.
Are you ever able to get some additional information from the UV light, for example, like the coating or? Yeah, you are.
Yeah, of course. If we look sometimes, but it's not also not that sometimes it's not enough to look at dinolite. Yeah, for example, dinolite. What I'm not using it that much for paper itself. I use dinolite and UV or infrared for inks. Yeah, if there are some fillers, sometimes I can have the hint. But not for really fiber or paper identification. Because sometimes layers of, if there's like a paint or order of layers, so that's very helpful. Exactly, coatings if there's something or some primers, so that's very helpful too. Okay. And or basic texture, right? If there are some or something on the surface. But sometimes I use the dinolite on the light table as well. So I see more, but it's always, and for technology, area is too small.
Yeah. And just ask about that paper. There's a really good rattle in it. Is it sized?
Pardon?
Is it sized?
Which one?
This one.
Yeah, they use starch. Yeah, they use starch. Yeah. So that's that's another point important. Yeah, sizing for and some papers are sized softer. And for example, I will. It's also interesting how local people classify their paper. I was in all my interviews, I always asking this question, what does it mean for you that this paper is good quality? So usually what they answered was, that it's not broken, not tear, so in very general way. But it was interesting how they differentiate, for example, in between Daphne and Stellera. So exactly what they did was you did. They just sound, and by hearing, so they understand if it's softer like Stellera. So this is, for example, I think this is the. Okay, so this is one. This is. Yeah. So this has a little bit Stellera only, but that's mostly Daphne, and this is Stellera, right? So you already see. So it's the local knowledge in a way, but of course somebody who does not have experience in this. So what is sometimes, I always appreciate the connoisseurship knowledge, right? Because those people who really like to collect, or they know the objects and they have a lot of knowledge. Or local people, like they use this, it works in a way. But only if you really have some experience, As you
said earlier, what the paper is going to be used for. Whether it's the pen, the ink, the wood impression. I mean, in the West we have metal plates. Paper has to be harder, so much different surface. Yeah. For these Japanese prints we have here, beautiful. I mean, it just comes in contact and it's off again. Yeah. Paper soft. You don't even leave an impression of the actual wood. So exactly. These papers are so adapted to the art form or to the calligraphy It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Like whether it is pen or brush, right? And for example, like a difference of, let's say, Tibetan and Chinese papers, right? So of course, technology, laid lines, this is also things very important. But why those papers are so different? What do you think? The tool, right? So the brush and the pen, So you cannot write with the pen or totally absorbent blotted paper. So because ink will just go through blots and there is no nice calligraphy. And if you write with wooden pen like Tibetans, so you have the closed surface, so it's totally sized, and polished. Even that's very often also, so you can control because you write very in a kind of one by one, slow or a bit quicker, but that doesn't matter. But it's the different story to the brush. So you write slowly, step by step, let's say, right? So if the paper is sides and ink does not come through very quickly, you can control the writing. If the paper is absorbent, no control at all. You touch it and somehow, so your writing will not be beautiful, right? So that's also, but I always, I would like to also point to the fact that sometimes you can manipulate. So also it's not only paper or not only ink. And people usually, so, you know, I work with paper, my colleagues work with ink, for example, right? So that's, it tends like to separate things. But in fact, aesthetic effect artist or scribe achieves is connected to all materials together. So let's say the similar effect, for example, if I'm a calligrapher, I can achieve by either size the paper more or less, or make the ink thicker or thinner, right? And that's also a skill. Exactly, exactly. So that's you can manipulate those things if you know the properties of material. So that's very difficult to kind of transfer this into science and to kind of let people know how to interpret the results, yeah? Because sometimes this fluctuation in numbers or properties, it's not really that meaningful. It may be just the skill of and adjustment of materials. But that's like a detail. But I think for a classification is still kind of obvious if we pull together all those properties of the materials, so we can group and classify papers that way. Oh, I think I'm almost at the time. So yeah, maybe just to finish, I would like you just to look and maybe try to group the paper. They are, yeah, I know, but just please don't look at the descriptions. Try to try to classify which paper you think are from East Asia, maybe China, which European.
Chinese rice straw from the rice.
Yeah, from the rice like stalks, from the stems of rice, right? So it's also, you know, also in many conservation literature we have this, or not only conservation, ethnographic, and we have this rice paper, right?
Yes.
It's this, first of all, it's so vague. Exactly. It's the rice paper, maybe this piece here, cut, which is not a paper at all. But also in Nepal and in Himalayas, all the lamas and many ethnographers and scholars also use. And, you know, when I say to people...
for you today. Actually, it would be very... A map.
Well, geographical areas.
I mean, we have
can
so...
put it in the computer.
Yeah, it would also, I mean, when we're talking about Sumatran and Burmese and all the different ranges of papers that are here, I mean, even for you to even do this exercise now is phenomenally difficult.
Yeah.
I find that. What you've just asked me to do.
You know, it's there are also I find that sometimes it's good to do something like this, because then people remember a different way, right? It's like when you are sitting in a car and you are driver, and the next person, if you are driver, you know the way, right? If you're sitting next to, not always.
I love your paper. I'm really.
It's interesting, right?
Yes.
Just,
Sorry, it's from this.
from the stalks, not from the kind of leaves. It's from the stalks. So it's growing.
Yeah. Okay.
And
This.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm really amazed. I would say,
about the sizing and the coaching, like you were saying that it really depends on the material. And it's true that I've encountered some Nepalese scrolls that are on paper that has very low coating compared to European or Arabic papers. And
almost known. Almost known sometimes.
And I'm thinking, could it be maybe because I'm thinking of a point of view of when you are writing with a brush, if it has less coating, it's true that it might diffuse more, but you also need less ink because less ink is needed to actually.
Yeah, but actually this paper, for example, for Tibetan books, before writing, it has quite a lot of sizing because they glued the layers.
So when you don't find a coating, because sometimes I feel it's
on historical documents you don't have a coating, and that's exactly because they are not used to do it traditionally, so they kind of don't know. And also the property of Daphne fibers, it has a lot of plant, has a lot of starch and itself exactly. So you can.
So
that's the only
coating, which is very.
No, they would not be able to do it if it would be not Daphne paper. On Stellara they cannot do it
That's why
easily.
I was like you don't have any coating, but the ink doesn't spread. Like it's very much. It's a resin that is very neat. So that must be why. Because they are already much more starch.
They have much more starch in the structure, exactly. So
Thank you.
that's
very much to understand a lot of things where I look at paper.
Yeah, exactly. That's why like a stage is when some substances get into, and some substances are directly with the properties.
What's the name? Remind me of this plant, the one that has already a lot of starch in it.
Daphne.
Is it the one where you have to pull it up?
No, the root is Stellara. Stellara, yeah.
I'm interested to the Amata paper.
Amata,
You have here?
No,
No?
no. Unfortunately, I think I forgot to take this one with me. Yeah.
This was
So-
a script to unify all of the languages of China. But it wasn't very popular.
Are you ready to have you been able to make some divisions in the?
You want to see the? Oh no. Professor doesn't have that.
I forgot to take the Amata. Sorry, so just.
I identified the place like from where the like I
But you looked at us cheating.
No. She knows that I didn't cheat.
So, or do you see any features which you are interested or somehow to explain, or just tell me? Because I think I haven't realized the time gone so quickly.
Looking at the very soft one.
Yeah.
I think is this one made by pouring? I'm just
This is pouring. Yeah, exactly. That's pouring. Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah. So. Is it like is it suitable to write like ink?
This is mostly those kind of papers are now made for conservation purposes. Yeah, so they are usually made with paper mulberry exactly, which has very long fibers and strong. So it's strong enough that when you use it for Western manuscripts or any kind of manuscripts, you can join tiers together. You can line it with something. You still see the text. And you really support the material, yeah. So this is why exactly why paper mulberry got so popular in the West, and why Asian papers got because it's really skill, yeah. It's beautiful what Japanese people really mastered, and Chinese as well, yeah. Korean, East Asia, they mastered to make strong, but really very soft, yeah, and thin paper, yeah. So was it useful to you as well?
Actually, you answered one of my big questions, which was the technology of the paper and the ink coming together.
Yeah.
But this kind of paper wouldn't take a brush very well.
Yeah.
Then this paper wouldn't take a stylus very well. So I wonder in a place like Dunhuang, when you've got some people writing in Tibetan, some people.
Yeah, and they're different
do they use
tools, exactly.
Is there discussion over the paper, or does the Tibetan simply switch to using a brush, like in your bit of birch bark, as opposed to using a stylus?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Very useful.
That's connected. It's easy. People often forget about those things, because it's like on the and when you just look at the features and don't understand, that's things became. But it helps to think about that.
I remember being in China and putting ink on different paper, and in China as well. You use some paper. If you touch a brush to it, the ink is going to spread right away. It doesn't have the fixed tip property.
Yeah.
But also, these Tibetan texts on on the making of ink, because even then you have to change the ingredients depending on temperature.
Yeah, depending on temperature, season, for sometimes for specific for color, or for that's true. There's this article by I think Coopers,
Christoph
Coopers, just 9 ways, so he translated. So it's quite interesting how many things got to.
Yeah, I gave him this book, and